So good morning and good afternoon to everyone as you're joining us. We're just going to take a few minutes and allow people to sign on here. We'll get started here in just a second. We can see a few people signing in. So again, we're just going to take a few minutes here and let people join us as they sign on here. And we'll kick off in just 1 or 2 minutes. If you're just signing on now, you're in the right spot. We'll get started in 1 or 2 minutes. We're just giving everyone a chance to sign in. All right, everyone, thanks for joining. We'll take about 1 more minute and then we'll get started. All right, still a few people joining us, but we'll go ahead and kick things off here. Thank you everyone for making the time to join us this morning, this afternoon, or this evening, depending on where you are in the world. Appreciate you joining us for another Argon's ACES courses, which if you attended one of our ACES courses in the past, about once a month, we host a clinical education summit where we pick an intriguing clinical topic and we have physician panelists discuss that topic and share some case examples. Today's presentation is a little bit of a different twist on that, in that we'll be talking about innovation and how physician ideas become great products. And we'll be using an example today of the Scorpion, which is the device that Argon has partnered with some of our panels today to develop and launch. So if you haven't heard yet, Argon branded 2021 our year of innovation. What you see here is a list of, or a picture of 6 products that we launched in 2020, a result of some investments that we made in R&D a few years ago. And even amidst a pandemic, we were able to successfully launch new products. And this year, we hope to launch even more, shooting for 7 product launches this year. And one of those products will be the subject of today's discussion. And that's the Scorpion and Scorpion X portal vein access sets. So the reason why we're going to focus on this particular device for today is this is a device that was a result of a physician-born idea. So we have Dr. Lowell Khan with us, who was the original inventor of the Scorpion. He partnered with Hatch Medical, medical device incubator, to further develop the idea and broker it to Argon Medical, who's hosting this. And so the collaboration of those parties brought Scorpion to market. We're going to leverage that experience in our experience of you know, all our time in med device to help kind of talk through the process of taking a physician idea to a commercialized product. So the learning objectives for this presentation are to understand the process, the resources required, a few of the key players, and even the companies that can help a physician take a product idea and make it into a commercialized product. So to help illustrate and achieve our learning objective, we have the 4 panelists. As I mentioned, Dr. Lowell Khan is joining us. Dr. Khan is a vascular and interventional radiologist and founder of the New England Vascular Center, which is an office-based lab in Springfield, Massachusetts. He has an undergrad degree in economics and pre-med studies from Amherst College, an MD and an MBA from Emory. And he completed his residency in diagnostic radiology and fellowship in vascular and interventional radiology at the University of Virginia. As I mentioned, Dr. Khan is the physician inventor of the Scorpion, and he holds multiple patents and has experience in that area. Also with us is Paul Gianneschi. So Paul is the managing principal and founder of Hatch Medical, which is a privately held medical device incubator and technology brokerage firm. Paul spent over 29 years in the med device industry as an executive in various roles, serving in senior level sales and marketing management with TR Bard, Bausch & Lomb, and NDC Health. Paul holds a Bachelor of Science degree from the University of Florida and an executive MBA in international management from Mercer University. Our next panelist is Mer Dahan. So Mer is the Senior Vice President of Research and Development for Argon and has responsible for all R&D activities that Argon takes on worldwide. Prior to Argon, Mer served as Executive Vice President of R&D for Emirates and held several senior technical and program management positions at Baxter Healthcare. Mer holds a BS degree in electrical engineering from Ben Gurion University and a master's degree in EE and an MBA from Illinois Institute of Technology. And I'm your moderator for tonight. My name is Tom Yonker. I'm currently the Global Vice President of Marketing for Argon Medical, and I've been with Argon since 2013. In my role, I have responsibility for upstream marketing, which covers everything from the business opportunity and user needs to downstream marketing, which covers sales support and marketing activities and commercialization of products. I have over 15 years in the medical device industry, and prior to that, I was an acquisitions officer in the U.S. Air Force. So with that introduction, the general flow for our discussion today and for our panel, we'll basically walk through almost the chronology of a product from concept to commercialization, starting with generating the idea, developing the product, building the business case, and then launching. And before I kick it off with the first question, I just want to let everybody know that we'll be monitoring the chat. And so if you have questions for our panelists, germane to the conversation, please go ahead and put your questions in the chat, and we'll be sure to ask those questions of the panelists. So with that, let's kick it off with a question for Dr. Khan. So let's start by just talking about physician ideas in general. With the number of procedures performed every day worldwide, I've got to think there's a lot of people out there with ideas on how to make those procedures better, faster, or maybe even cheaper. So what do you believe is the main thing preventing those ideas from actually advancing further and becoming a commercialized product?
So I think one of the biggest challenges actually is identifying the need. Sometimes the solution can in some ways be the easy part, particularly with some good conversations with colleagues. But I think you're absolutely right. A lot of people have ideas, a lot of things go down on the corner of a napkin, so to speak, but they don't move from there. And I think, you know, it's hard to say one specific factor is a hurdle. I mean, I can comment in my own life, you know, I've got 3 young kids, so I have a busy family life. I've managed to never have a lifestyle job. I've always been one of those guys with a lot of hours, and work has crept into the evenings, early mornings, and weekends. So free time, I think, to pursue it. Then I've often thought if I were going back to the undergrad level, I wish I had done like an engineering degree, because I felt that my strength is I, have a creativity for new ideas, but then I don't have the mechanics or the know-how to prototype or use CAD systems and so forth. And I would imagine others feel that way too. I think having an engineering degree or some background would be helpful. I think finances can play into it as well. I mean, obtaining a patent is not inexpensive. And what I think most people don't realize is that, if you have a really good idea, getting a US patent alone is not enough. You literally have to pick the regions of the world you want to protect it in. So then you have to pay for those costs. And then additionally, maintaining a patent, there's fees every year. And I think the system is they don't want people blocking IP that aren't serious about it. And so there's a cost to it. But so I think, finances, time, making it happen, having the right connections. I mean, I remember one of my biggest struggles was I didn't know any engineers. So knowing someone to talk to, I think finding Hatch was very good for us. but it is a little overwhelming if you're just sitting there with a good idea, but with not having the context, the time, the finances, or kind of the wherewithal to know where to go with it next.
So you brought up Hatch. So Paul, you would see physician ideas at a different point in the process, but what do you feel like is the barriers that you see to physician ideas moving on to commercialized products?
Sure. And first of all, thanks, Tom, for inviting me to be a part of the panel. We're incredibly excited to be on the cusp of launching Scorpion with you guys. We're really excited, and you guys have done a great job. You know, from my standpoint, two stumbling blocks. Oftentimes, clinicians come to us with ideas to solve problems that they encounter in their practice, but they may not be universal problems. And so I think understanding the business case for a potential idea is an important step. As is, and Lowell touched on it, the IP, intellectual property, patent protection is another important piece. Understanding what that landscape looks like. You know, we're a small company, so if we're going to take on an early stage idea, we want to have a high level of confidence that we're going to receive some level of IP protection. And so when someone comes to us that already has issued IP, as Lowell did, that's one step, that's one hurdle that reduces risk. And quite frankly, that's what this is all about. This whole process is about reducing risk for that next step along the way. And so those are the two big pieces for us, IP and business case. Okay.
And perhaps even further down the road, Mayor, you know, I know at Argon, we see a lot of physician ideas, and there's sometimes new ideas and there's sometimes for like altered products, but how can you tell if a physician idea has merit? So if someone has an idea right now, how can they tell if it's a good idea or a less good idea?
Okay, so we usually look at Argon into three factors. And just to relate that our factors are very basic, so many of you in the US, you probably watched the show Shark Tanks. You're Canadian, you watch The Dragon, and probably in Europe or somewhere else, similar shows. They always ask three basic questions, and we are the same. What is the problem your technology or product is trying to address? In our case, what are the clinical gaps the product or technology is addressing? The second factor is it cost effective relative to the product out there? And if it's not cost effective, is it justified due to the fact that you are addressing clinical gap? And lastly is, how close are you into commercialization? It can be a great idea. We are in industry and we want to be closer to commercialization. We're not academic, that we do extensive or basic research. Therefore, we assess how close is this product so it can go to commercialization quickly and get out there. So three factors: addressing problem clinical gap, cost effectiveness, and closeness to commercialization.
Okay. And I just want to comment on that and piggyback on what Mayor said. So yeah, we're assessing the clinical merit, but we also have to assess the potential adoption and how quickly, you know, I think Paul commented, is this a problem for one person singular, or is it a problem more broadly that needs to be solved? But specific to each company has their own flavor, their own focus, if you will. So we look at, is the device that we're considering relevant for the markets that we have access to, that our sales team calls on, or the countries we sell in, so on and so forth. You know, Mayor mentioned the design maturity. It's less risky for us to take something that's closer to completion across the finish line. So, you know, the trade-off is you tend to pay more for those things, but you know that your risk of success is a little bit lower. And then it's usually boils down to a dollars and cents discussion, even on the micro level. You know, in today's health economic environment, is someone willing to pay a little bit more for this thing that we're adding to the procedure? Is it making the procedure faster, more cost effective, or you know, revolutionizing the way it's done? So I just wanted to share a little bit of the company perspective and turn things around a little bit. So Paul, I want to maybe send it back to you because we've talked a little bit about, you know, how you assess you know, ideas, but maybe we got ahead of ourselves. Can you talk to us about what Hatch does and you know, what the company is intended to do and how you help in the process here incubating ideas.
Sure. I think there we go. So Hatch Medical, we're a medical device incubator and technology broker. We're focused on assisting physician inventors and entrepreneurs, but it can be a tech, a nurse, an engineer, it really doesn't matter. But with novel concepts, we typically are interested in less invasive devices. And we'll do everything from taking it from back of the napkin forward. So intellectual property attorneys, biomedical engineers, bricks and mortar manufacturers, take it to an inflection point, and then we will seek to sell it, license it, or distribute it based on where it is in that development process. We do focus quite a bit on peripheral cardiovascular devices in the oncology space and orthopedics to some degree as well. A lot of that is reflected in the fact that there are 6 clinicians who comprise our scientific advisory board, and they are interventional radiologists, vascular surgeons, and interventional cardiologists. So anything that they would touch in their clinical practice, we'd likely have some interest in. The model that on the incubator side is perhaps a bit unique. It revolves around sharing risks. So our partners work with us in exchange for equity or some other form of consideration. So it could be an engineering team that works with us and they may have the equity in the project. Could be a manufacturer of devices who might participate with us in exchange for the rights to manufacture the device for a period of time or a certain number of units. So our model is creative. We all are either enjoying success together or we all go down the proverbial tubes together. So and it's proven to work, and it has enabled us to do more with less over the years without having to go out and raise millions of dollars to develop devices. We've been pretty successful in developing on the incubator side with this model.
Okay, Paul, we've got a question from the audience. What is the deciding factor for Hatch on whether or not to take on a project or to pass on it?
So for us, a lot of it has to do with, what clinical issue or problem it solves, the business case around it. We tend to like 510K-able devices. For those of you unfamiliar with the regulatory process, that's a lower hurdle, but yet still a hurdle. We tend to want to focus on technologies that we know that we can bring into the market on our own should we need to do that. So we can self-fund and get it through the regulatory process and into the market. So those are some of the elements that we look at. We tend to also like devices that are not in crowded spaces. Maybe there's 1 or 2 players. It tends to be what many big companies would consider smaller markets, and people aren't paying attention to those areas, such as TIPS access was one of them. We had similar success in foreign body retrieval years ago. So those are some of the things that we look at.
Okay, and another question from the audience, Dr. Khan, back to something that you said. You mentioned that part of your upfront costs are associated with your IP protection. So how much do you invest in, how much does it cost to get IP protection? And there was a follow-on question from the audience. Would you have considered a provisional patent?
Well, first off, I'm a big believer, if you really think you have an idea, you want to take it as far as you can. So prototyping, patents, whatever, because if all you have is an idea on a piece of paper, it's not going to be worth much. I remember hearing years ago, for example, Cook, if you came to them with an idea, I think the most you might get is like 3% if it was just an idea, even if it was a brilliant idea that made millions of dollars for the company. So I think there's something to be said for within whatever you're capable of doing it, take it as far as it can. One, from a financial argument, I think that's true. But then also, I think it's an easier sell if you come to Hatch or to anyone else for that matter, and you have prototyping is worth its weight in gold. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But in terms of, provisional patents are very cheap. They're probably $100, $200. I don't know what the current rate is, but they're inexpensive. They don't require a lot. They basically let you put your mark in the sand for a year before you convert it to a real patent. So I think I've always done a provisional patent just to kind of, because worst case scenario, you waste a couple $100, not even. But I think an early expenditure, a very good early move is do an IP search, because I've had my bubble burst more times than I can count, where I thought I had this, fantastic idea that there's no way anyone could have thought of. And then you go on patents.google.com and start searching away, and patents are very hard to read, but nonetheless, you realize that your idea has been thought of, and you should do that like literally as a first thing before you spin your wheels on something. But if you do that and it looks clear, then you draft a provisional. And then the next thing I do before investing any significant amount of money is you get a patent attorney to have them do an IP search, because they read patents for a living. Maybe they'll realize that your IP is somehow overlapping with something that exists. But I think getting that out of the way early is good. And then if that comes back, if your search comes clean, the patent attorney's search comes clean, and you talk the idea with some colleagues and you think it's engineering feasible and so forth, then you're starting to get a lot of green lights to move to the next step.
Okay.
But a real patent is a lot more expensive,
So you mentioned prototyping, and that we will get to that in a second. So let's go ahead and actually hop on that now. And I wanted to show, we got these pictures of the first kind of drawings and concepts of the Scorpion. So keep it with you for a second here, Dr. Khan. What was the initial concept for the Scorpion? Where did the idea come from? And how did you know that it had merit?
So Scorpion was first thought of when I was a fellow, because I was watching, I had really good attendings at University of Virginia, and even for very seasoned attendings, the one procedure I saw people sometimes struggle with more than others were TIPS procedures. That it just, compared to most of what IRs do, was technically challenging, and it seemed very medieval in some sense, that you're jabbing this 40-some centimeter needle a little bit blindly into the liver with some deductive, reasoning as to where you expect the portal vein. But then I thought, well, you have one, preformed needle shape at about 30 degrees. And for a lot of cirrhotic livers, the anatomy doesn't really match that, for example. And what I found my attendings doing, and once I was an attending, I was doing it, was custom shaping the needles, bending them and doing this, that, and the other. And even that was fraught with problems. You could overdo it and kink it and so forth. So the earliest concept, which you're shown in this picture, was I had the idea of like a shotgun approach, where what you're seeing in that picture, and I'm actually holding one of the early models here. You can see the 3 needle tips coming out, and you can see the handle here. This was one of our early prototypes of it. But basically it was a shotgun approach, which was to say that, all right, well, we're going to have one main needle, which we were trying to do similar in size to the existing Cook sets, for example. And then out the tip of that needle, we were going to have 3 or 4 small needles kind of go, if there were, you'd spread them. If there were 4, they'd be 90 degrees apart, depending on how many needles you had, but basically a shotgun approach. And then those needles would connect to a common syringe, and you would aspirate, you'd fire the needles and then aspirate as you pulled back, and you'd watch the individual lumens, and whichever one had blood return in it, you'd puff a little contrast. And if one of the needles happened to hit the portal vein, then you'd thread an 014 or an 018 needle, and then gradually, of course, upsize. But one of the things I said was that prototyping is so valuable, because you look at these CAD drawings, for example, it looks pretty slick, pretty cool. But then when the engineer showed me this thing, I mean, this thing is huge. I wouldn't put this in a cow. I mean, it's just way too big, way too traumatic. And had we not prototyped it, I might have wasted a lot more time and energy doing this. And prototypes aren't cheap, but they're also not super expensive. Especially with 3D printers and stuff, you can produce stuff. And there's a lot to be said for holding something in your hand and kind of spinning around and looking at it. And it was after we kind of went down this wrong road that we said, what do we need all these needles for? What we really need is an outer needle to kind of point in the general direction of the portal vein, and then an inner needle that spins 360 degrees. And we were much happier. And this shows, this is basically what you're seeing here. This was the level I had prototyped it to. You can see I created an LLC, Khan Technologies, and we tried different bends, different shapes, and we were playing around with fusing nitinol because we wanted muscle memory. We didn't want the tip of the needle to lose its preformed shape, but then we wanted the longitudinal strength of stainless steel. And, you know, we were playing a lot with the engineering of avoiding friction between the two needles, of running one needle inside of the other. But the concept, you know, here's, you know, version, this is the one, you know, we came up with a very ergonomic handle with these little winglets, you know, so that you could generate some force. But the concept was just that, you know, you could spin an inner needle 360 degrees around to really finesse and find the portal vein. And so, like I said, this, what you're seeing in the picture here is the level we had it at when we brought it to Hatch.
Okay, so then Paul, to you, when you saw it, why did you think that it had merit and it was something that Hatch would be interested in?
Sure. Well, I mean, you know, and I'm no clinician, but, you know, for years having been in the industry and the interventional space and watching physicians struggle gaining access to the portal vein, it's a time-consuming, oftentimes very time-consuming to gain access, and it's a go no-go procedure. If you can't gain access to the portal vein, then the procedure doesn't happen. So, you know, we liked it because we thought that it reminded us actually of some other projects that we worked on that we had success with. Again, you know, we knew that it was in a underserved market. There were, you know, so there were few competitors in the space. The latest innovation was probably 30 years ago. We knew there was a better way. And so when we saw this initial concept, we liked it. And so, you know, because of our physician advisory panel, there's several interventional radiologists in that group that performed tips, and we went to them, and the feedback was positive. And so then it was just a question of, you know, where was it and where did it need to go? To what inflection point before we could be in a position to either license it or sell the technology to someone in the industry. And so for us, you know, there's some things that image that you're showing up there. You know, the darkened needle is in the bottom right-hand corner is, that's nitinol coming out the end, right? But, you know, the interface wasn't great. There was, as Lowell pointed out, there was, you know, dissimilar metals that were bonded or welded together, which we knew would create a potential nightmare from a liability standpoint. And so it was just really, you know, we liked the idea a lot. And he had issued IP, which was fantastic. We said, okay, what can we do to massage this to advance it a little bit further and make it manufacturable and allow it to have success. And so that's when we started talking in earnest with Dr. Khan, created a relationship, and then we brought in strategic partners to help us advance it forward. So engineering, manufacturing partners. We had completed a regulatory assessment on it. And, you know, so that was part of the process. And ultimately, the inflection point for us was getting it through an animal feasibility study. One of Lowell's friends, who's a highly skilled interventional radiologist that has done quite a bit in liver access, participated in that study. And that was sort of the eureka moment for all of us, I think, was once that animal study was complete, we realized this really had something there.
Okay, great. So one of the tricky things about prototypes is you look at it and it looks like it's a finished product. So Mayor, we'll bring you in here. So you're looking at this product. Is it ready to be manufactured? And what are the deltas that you saw would remain between the prototypes that you were holding and the finished product?
Yeah, the short answer is no, it was not ready. And it's understood why. As you heard from Dr. Khan, he had an idea, he wanted as fast as possible to build prototype, to hold it in his hand and make sure that it works and addresses clinical need. I saw immediately that he's addressing clinical needs, as he indicated. You are in space, you are trying to go between hepatic vein and portal vein, and you are in 2D, so it's very challenging. So it can take you a few iterations to go from one point to the other point. Some physicians sometimes take them 8 times. So the clinical needs was there, so he was trying to address that. And he came to the conclusion is, I don't want to run my own company. I don't want to build my marketing organization, sales organization, R&D, engineering, the infrastructure for regulated environment, and I want to find a partner. So he found us. So naturally, the product was not ready. It was a prototype. We are in the regulated industry, so we have an obligation to make sure that the product, when it goes there, it's safe and etc. So by definition, you interface with the FDA, you need to go get an approval, 510K. So you need to have the appropriate evidence documentation in place. We call it design history file in terms of the requirement, the risk analysis, the drawing, and so on and so forth, because you're in regulated environment. So you need to have all of that information in order for you to be ready for manufacturability. Secondly, while you go to the design from manufacturability perspective, you're going to make this in mass volume. And in order to do that, you need to, usually in our industry, you need to design molds. You design molds, and those molds are going to produce for you parts from manufacturability perspective, so you can do that. So the product was not ready from the design for manufacturability, was not ready from a moldability perspective, but it was addressing the basic needs. So those are kind of like the gaps that we had, and we just had to
to the group. So you just talked about all the things that need to be done to actually commercialize the product, and we heard early on where it started. If you're a physician with an idea, where do you stop? How far do you take your idea before it's ready to be marketed to a medical device company or some other strategic partner that may want to pick it up? Dr. Khan, maybe I'll start with you and your opinion on that.
I think you really have to ask yourself a question. What are your core competencies? Do you have marketing knowledge yourself? Do you have business knowledge yourself? Do you know how to structure deals? What are your free finances available for it? What is your time? So there is no one right answer. I think each case, and then, what is the risk? How light, there's more reward the more you invest and spend on your own, because you can command a lot more of the, the final price for it. So I think, what's your tolerance for risk? How much do you believe in the idea? And then where are you at in your career? I think if I had come up with Scorpion, maybe towards the end of the career, I might have been willing to do more myself, but I'm still at a place, and I have my own OBL. I really, really enjoy treating patients. I'm not ready to kind of give that up and go, fully into business. But, maybe later in my career I will. And so, I don't think, for me, I wasn't ready to say I'm going to quit practicing and start a company. But, other people might say, what, I'm ready to hang up the lead and do it. And I would encourage them to do it. But I think you really just have to look at all of the individual circumstances to make that decision.
Paul, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think as Lowell pointed out, it's an individual decision. This process is not for the faint of heart. And what I mean by that, I have, said this more than once to a prospective client of ours. Being a physician is more than a full-time job, and developing medical devices is certainly a full-time job. I've seen some clinicians do both, but something in their life tends to give, and so it's not an easy path to do it and continue to work full-time. And obviously, each person's financial situation and the risk tolerance also plays a significant role. that's, I'd like to think that's part of the gap that we fill at Hatch Medical, is that we can step in and partner with the clinician and take that early stage idea, get it to a point where there's value, where it's some inflection point where we can license, sell, or distribute that technology. And arguably, they'll do better, I believe, working with us than if they just showed up with the scribble on the back of a napkin at one of the bigger device companies.
Mayor, how about your thoughts? How far should a physician go with a concept before trying to sell it to a company?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm like Dr. Khan. There's no one answer. They can go as far as they want. And if you go, the further you go, the more it's mature it is, it's just more invest. From our point of view, we just assessed that you are close enough to commercialization. So I think it depends on the individual, and all the reasons you heard from both, from Paul and Dr. Khan, account of the individual has to take that in consideration and how far he needs to go. But if you are you dedicated? And you heard that also from Paul. Paul, again, I'll take you back into the Shark Tank, and they always ask, no. Why you're not 100% dedicated to that? And I'm still keeping my job and my day job and my day salary. That tells me you're not really into it. You don't have enough skin in the game. So every individual has to make their assessment. But if you are between them, my suggestion, find a good partner and just pass it on. So it depends on the individual.
Yeah, I'll throw one more log on that fire too. So not only is it just the individual, it's also the idea, because really, really great ideas, really revolutionary things can take off really quickly. If it's a really intuitive concept and it's, the value is clear, those can be taken up pretty quickly. And so if your concept requires some explanation, if your concept, if the value isn't obvious, those are things that could slow it down and make the process go longer as well. So I want to take a second now, and we'll turn it to developing the product. So transitioning from the idea to now making it an actual product. And I'll start here, Paul, with you. So you heard pretty much every one of us say that Scorpion was a pretty good idea. And clearly Argon kind of bought off on the idea and licensed the technology, but it didn't happen overnight. So what was that process like, and why do you think that the Scorpion took a while before it was finally licensed by Argon?
Sure. Well, none of these devices that clinicians are using in practice are easy to develop. I mean, they may look simple, but simple is not necessarily easy. Simple to use. So, there were, as Lowell pointed out, dissimilar metals. You had one curved needle moving through another curved needle. So friction was an issue. We had to figure out how to address that, which is unique to Scorpion, utilizing a peak needle to help not only but to serve multiple purposes, not only to assist in passing that device from one needle through the other, but also functioning in some ways similar to a catheter. So there's some unique elements there were some unique challenges that we encountered along the way that had to be solved, and figuring out a way to ensure that it had the pushability that Dr. Khan wanted, but also the flexibility. And so there was, and can we make it manufacturable in such a way that it would address all those concerns? So it just took time.
Dr. Khan, how did you maybe modify? We talked about the modifications to the product, but what about maybe the pitch or the value assessment? How did you modify how you told the story when you were in that process of trying to sell the idea to prospective buyers?
Honestly, that was one of the easy parts. I would say the hardest part with Scorpion, is what Paul was talking about, was engineering it. It was much harder than it looks. There were issues trying to deal with the needle wanted to whip. If you're not an engineer and you're taking two curves opposed to each other, it looks very easy when you sketch it on paper, but the prototyping and meeting with the engineers was invaluable. And it was really, I was amazed with what we finally got, which was a very, very functional, product, but there was a lot of engineering. In terms of the sales pitch, I think if you go, for example, when I started at my last job before I started my OBL, there were 5 IR docs, but only 2 of us did tips. And I think, that's not uncommon. That's unusual compared, if you go to a practice and say, well, how many of the IR docs do venograms? It's going to be 100% of them. Or how many put in ports? 100% of them. But tips, not all docs did them. And so I felt like, boy, this market could really grow, particularly internationally, because I think there are people kind of scared of the procedure. There's technical failures with it and so forth. So I think if you go to any IR doc, whether they're new to the game or they're very experienced, but you say, I've got something that's not a better mousetrap, but rather it's revolutionary. It's a totally different, approach to finding the portal vein that'll make it much easier, cut down on time, cut down on bleeding from, bad passes with the needle. It's not hard to sell it. If you've really got a product that's going to do what you're saying, it's an easy sale, I would say. I don't know, Paul, would you agree? I didn't feel like the sales pitch was hard.
Sure. No, I mean, when we were out talking to companies, very often in the process, they would introduce us to their physician advisors, or they would be a part of the conversation. And I can remember on more than one occasion, that advisor would look to us and say, you guys are going to control the market with this thing. That's very validating. And obviously it encouraged us, and we saw that, there was more than one company that expressed interest in Scorpion. And we think because, sometimes the best solutions are ones that are simple and make the most sense. It wasn't easy to get there, but the solution is, when you look at it, makes perfect sense. And it's solving a problem that exists. So,
I mean, that's why, to Paul's point, but like I said before, sometimes I think the solution is not necessarily the hard part. It's identifying the problem. And with Scorpion, I think where we got lucky was no one argues it's a problem. And Mayor mentioned that too. Paul alluded to it too. Every doc thinks a problem they have is a problem for everyone else. And that's not the case. But I think with tips, the vast majority of docs, even the ones that have done, hundreds and hundreds of them, agree it's not a simple procedure, and there's a learning curve, and this, that, and the other. And so, if you've got something that really flattens that learning curve and makes it a lot easier, no one's going to fight you on it.
So, Mayor, let's talk about the next part of that process. So, new technology is licensed, specific to Scorpion or not. What comes next?
From the moment, we are commercializing company and industry. So like everywhere else, we have new product development stage gating. So that's kind of like our phasing when we take the product through. And our typical stage gating for us, it's concept feasibility stage. When you go at the beginning, you do all your planning, regulatory, marketing, R&D planning, and some concept, and you studied it with a physician. You move to development stage when you do all the details, design, drawing, etc., mold design, and so on and so forth, and then getting it to regulatory submission. And the next phase is the launch readiness. You got regulatory approval, and you produce some products. You hand it on to downstream marketing so they can do the evaluation, to follow by, are you ready for the commercialization? Supply chain is geared up. You have what you need to do so you can market it out there. So those are like typical stages that we take it through, a typical product development stage gate.
And how long does that process take?
Well, it depends on the product and the technology, but let's talk about this one specifically. And I will articulate why it took that long. It took us 14 months from the moment we kick off the project to the moment we got it to regulatory submission. Some innovators think, oh, 14 months, that's too long. I can do that in 3 months. I'll break it for you in very big pieces why 14 months is pretty fast in this industry to get to 510K, provided even you have the concept and the prototyping. You're spending some time there and the detailed design, drawing, and et cetera, engineering, easily you're spending months. You need to go and generate prototypes. You need to produce prototypes. You go out there, it's catheters. It takes 16 weeks to get catheters. You need to generate all those prototypes. You're lucky if it's one iteration. You may have to iterate second time. Then you move to the stage of testing. It takes, and the design of the molds, it takes easily 4 or 5 months to design a mold, fabricate the parts, and make sure it's qualified. And it takes you months to go through the testing. Just biocompatibility testing can take 10 to 12 weeks. So 14 months, it's pretty good record. So it took us 14 months. And it was like typical in the FDA. It takes to this type of product, between 4 to 6 months to get an approval. It took us 5.5 months. And then you just hand it to marketing to do the downstream. So it sounds a lot, almost close to 2 years, but relatively it's pretty fast when you reduce the regulatory submission and the point that it's sitting at the FDA, 14 months for kickoff into FDA submission. It's pretty rapid. Some technologies, which are different than this, can take years. If you need to run animal studies, perhaps you need to run clinical trials. In this case, it was 14 months to regulatory submission.
And that's the last, I'll say, half of the process. Paul, the first half of the process, you received the design and there were some iterations there as well. Can you talk about what you guys saw, how you needed to iterate, and how long that process took? How long did Scorpion incubate before it was finally licensed?
Sure. Interesting. You know, Tom, you're nice enough to ask the questions or provide us with the questions beforehand. I went back and looked at our agreement when that was signed with Dr. Khan and when we signed our agreement with Argon. And so that was about a 3.5 year period. And so there was, during that process, it was identifying the right partners. It was identifying engineering challenges that need to be overcome. It was performing animal studies, bench testing, regulatory assessments. I mean, there was a lot that went into it, and it's an iterative process. As Mir said, somebody like Argon, who has the ability to manufacture a lot of these technologies themselves, when you're going out and you want a couple catheters to test, it's difficult sometimes to get a manufacturing partner who's willing to just produce small volumes for you. So again, it's picking the right partner. And sometimes when they're willing to do it, there's a lengthy timeline to get those samples. And then if they're not right, you're going through this process time and again. And again, it's an iterative process. So it might sound like a long time, and it felt like a long time, but to get to the point where Argon took over, and Argon didn't just take what we brought to them and went to market. And I have to give Argon a lot of credit here. There was a lot of continued refinement of the technology. The handpiece today is very different than the one that we brought to Argon when we first pitched the concept, the device to them. And so, again, to your credit, Argon wasn't afraid to make the investment and refine and improve the device. And I think what we're seeing and what we'll see in the market will be a recognition of those refinements and revisions.
If I can add one point in too, I think it's very important to think about who your partner is going to be. And I remember, Paul was shopping around Scorpion, talking to different folks. And I remember I was very excited about Argon because Argon is good at sharp, pointy things. They have the TLab set, which, I always thought there's a lot of overlap with their TLab set and, with the TIPS needle. It's a new space for them to get into. Argon also has a parent Chinese company, which if you think about liver disease and cirrhosis, the Asia market is probably significantly larger than the US market. So there were a lot of compelling, and if you've got a parent Chinese company, it's going to be a heck of a lot. And we had a Chinese patent. There were numerous reasons why this fit well with Argon. There were other companies that could have done this, but I think Paul and Steve and I were very happy when Argon was really engaging with us on this.
Great.
So interestingly enough, there's a little more to the story, and the reason why it took us only 14 months to bring Scorpion to market. So, Dr. Khan just mentioned the TLab. Well, we actually acquired the TLab in 2014, and about 2016, the primary competitor for TLab had a problem with one of the components of their kit, and they couldn't sell it anymore. And so overnight, we became provider of 100% of the market for transrectal liver biopsies, and then found that our sales were even exceeding what we thought the market size was. Come to find out, people were buying our TLab and using that center stiffening cannula in order to conduct TIPS procedures, because those were also not available from that same provider. So that was kind of an awakening for us too, that there's opportunity here. There's only one competitor. There's definitely a need, and it fits within our core competencies. So we had actually already started. Did I miss the slide here? I skipped right over it. We'd already started developing our own tip sets that also will be launching here soon, called the Traveler. And these are organically designed sets. But the benefit of that is we had already tested out our own introducer sheath, our own NPA catheter, the other pieces of the kit that allow you to do the procedure, so that when we saw the concept of Scorpion, ultimately we had asked ourselves the question, are we going to compete against this, or are we going to embrace this? And we were too afraid to compete against it because of the promise of the technology. So we decided to license it and bring it in-house. But we had already bought off that TIPS is the place that we wanted to be. And we saw the Scorpion as a great partner to these new kits, so that all 5 of these kits will be launching here pretty soon. So we're running short on time, but I do want to talk a little bit about building the business case. We talked about different elements of the business case, but maybe I'll start with you, Paul. How often is the business case clear when a physician brings a new product concept to you? And then how much do you find yourself having to help them refine that business case?
Sure. Well, generally speaking, when a clinician shows up on our doorstep, they're trying to solve a problem that they've experienced in their clinical practice. So we often have to guide them through this process and think through, what's the pain point that you're trying to solve? What's the market size? What's the market potential? And just have sort of, walk them through what a company is going to look at, like Argon, when you show up, because those are the important pieces that need to really be considered and thought through. So we often work together. I mean, it's not easy, for example, to identify the size of a market. Oftentimes, data may not be readily available. So we've got a few suggestions that we'll have them walk through. Look at your own practice, expand that out to friends and colleagues, and want to understand practice patterns and usage. Reimbursement's important. What the concept that you're trying to bring to market. Is it a simple solution that's easily manufacturable, or is it a complex one that's going to be exorbitantly expensive to manufacture? I mean, these are all important aspects. So the short answer is, Tom, very few come to us fully baked with the business case and understanding it.
All right, so let's turn it back to the practical application of the Scorpion. And Dr. Khan, how did you come up with the information, or how did you find the information? Was it you, or was it Hatch? But how did you support the business case for the Scorpion to help show the value?
Well, I had, I kind of modeled PowerPoint presentations and stuff off things I had learned in business school. I had some old case studies and business plans and things like that. So I had some spreadsheets and knowledge of, how to create, a proposal, and also how to kind of value the potential market. I did a lot of research online to try to understand, it's not difficult to figure out how many times the CPT code, for example, is submitted to CMS for a different, for a given procedure. And there are databases, both free and for pay, that you can research, how many tips are performed annually, how many globally. And then you have to come up, with any business proposal, you have to come up with the estimates. So what percentage of the market do I think I'll capture? Then you have to talk to the engineers about what's it going to cost to make it. What price point do you think the market will support? So you aggregate all this data, and then you can put together a value proposition, to present to a Hatch. I mean, Hatch is going to do all their own research anyway. But I think everyone here agrees the further you can take it along within whatever your capabilities are, the better. And so, I tried to have as much information as I could before going to Hatch with it. Just as Paul would have fully prepared as much as he had before he went to Argon with it,
And then Argon also does their business case analysis independent and compares it to.
There's a lot of
redundancy. So we get to the end of the process, we potentially have 3 different versions of the story, and we're trying to consolidate them, down.
Exactly right.
And let me add to that. And 3 times you go over the business case, and at the end of the day, this is from my experience, is you have this typical conversation during business case, marketing, sales. Everybody sits around the table and they say, that market is $1 billion. If we only get 0.01% of it, that's $50 million. And if we penetrate that much market share, we'll get that much. Doesn't happen. Second is, here's when we're going to launch it to development. You heard the term R&D is always late. We are the same. We're also late. We are fast, but we are late. So your business model doesn't work well. Oh, did you hit the cost target? You are off. So usually those are 3 parameters. With all 3 times you're doing it, those are challenges during building when you build business case.
Well, Mary, you might be airing our dirty laundry here. I don't know if it's Argon specific, so we forgot to mute you before you answered that.
I think developing an inventions like doing, building a house or doing a home edition, takes twice as long and costs twice as much. So it's just, things are estimates.
Yeah, there's a lot of unknowns. You certainly don't know what you're getting into it, and you start discovering those start becoming known, and the costs kind of add up. So I just put together on the slide here a few things that we typically will look at, independently, and then try and compare and contrast. So how big is the market, and what is our potential to penetrate it? How fast will we penetrate it over 5, maybe 10 years? How quickly will the new technology essentially pay for the effort to bring that technology to market? We also look at the sales model. Is it something that's disposable that our current sales force would sell, or is it something that is a capital equipment that's a different type of sale in the hospital, and not maybe something outside of a medical device company that people conceptualize? Time to market is very important. If we got to take more time to develop it, that's longer until we start seeing a return. A competitive analysis, it always helps if you're in a market where there's very few competitors, because it makes it easier to capture the share. And then the projected cost, which is squarely in, for us, in Mayor's camp, how much is it going to cost us to bring this technology to market? So I just wanted to share a little bit about that. So the last thing I wanted to comment on is we run short on time is the launch of Scorpion. But before I do that, I want to give everybody maybe 1 minute, for the people on the call here that have an idea and they're just looking for the #1 golden nugget of what to do with it. What is the one thing that you're proud of that you did right, or would have changed about this whole process? Dr. Khan, I'll start with you. What's the thing that someone should absolutely do with a physician idea?
Get a good NDA, talk about it with your colleagues to make sure you're not operating in a silo. Look for people that, like with tips, I went to the most skilled tips providers that I could possibly think of and get their feedback and input. And then don't sit on it. I mean, I think if I could do Scorpion over, I'd like to, just on my own end, not commenting on Hatch or Argon, just on my own end, have moved it faster. And I think you have to be realistic with what your own time constraints are, get the help that you need. But you know, it's make it happen. I mean, my favorite television show, hands down, is Shark Tank. And I think there's so much wisdom that comes out of that show. And, you know, Mayor brought up the point earlier, it's so true. You know, the sharks say if they see someone doing it part-time, they don't usually invest in it. And I think that's true. If you find yourself doing something part-time or you're not moving it expeditiously, then you need to get help and move it on, but don't just sit on a good idea.
Paul, what's your pearl of wisdom?
I mean, the difference between a dreamer and an inventor is action. So you've got to do something, whether it's filing a provisional application, talking to your colleagues. If you've got an idea, don't sit on it. Good ideas are perishable in this business. They don't last forever.
All right, Mayor, how about your pearl of wisdom?
Yeah, so I look at it from our perspective in industry. When we got the prototype of the concept, is be careful, and no offense over here, inventors love their invention. It's their baby. They don't want it to change. The same on the business side, he wants it fast. It doesn't take 14 months. Do it in 6 months. Look into how you're doing the development and etc. In our case, this was a great partner. When we went and we analyzed, is the handle ergonomically is going to work? We studied with many physicians and they gave us different feedback. So Dr. Khan said, whatever they tell you, you can change it. So he was not stubborn about, I want my handle as it was. The same when we went to Hatch Medical, we said, this is what it takes. They were very patient with us. It take a little bit more time. So you take it from the innovators, from this business partner, and make sure that, because you have the different lens, the industry lens, so you run it through your process, you run it through your physicians, because at the end of the day, we will all fail if when we commercialize it, it's not going to work or you have problems. They don't see that. They have different lens. We see the other lens, the industry. So just make sure where you have this demarcation.
And so my pearl will be very similar to what Dr. Khan said. I firmly believe for us, either in the new product development process, whether it's a physician idea or not, good product becomes great product the more sets of hands that you put that product into. At the end of the day, you don't want to design a race car that only 5 or 6 people can drive. You want to design the device that everybody can use, because that's when your idea becomes more than a great idea, it becomes a lucrative idea. So be open, protect yourself, but put your concept in as many hands as possible and listen to the feedback that you're given and use that to hone your idea to make it something great. So as I mentioned, kind of wrapping up here, we are just probably about 2 weeks away from launching the Scorpion and the Scorpion X in the United States. So we are pretty excited about that. We've had customer evaluations going on for the last few weeks. So we have some early learnings and some great successes from that. And we're excited to see what the technology will do when it gets into everyone's hands here in a couple of weeks. Thank you for your questions as you sent those in. We'll take the questions and who sent them in. We'll try and follow up with you afterwards if we didn't get a chance to address your questions live. And then a couple last things I wanted to mention is our next ACES event is June 17th. We'll be returning to the clinical education format, and we'll be talking about using rotational thrombectomy in the peripheral vasculature. As you might be familiar with our cleaner device. So encourage everyone to come back on June 17th for that at 7 o'clock Eastern. Here are the emails of the panelists. So if you wanted to follow up with something that you heard today, or you want to bring forward a physician idea to anybody on this panel, feel free to do so. The contact information is here if you want to take a quick screenshot of that. You can also reach out to any one of us. We can get you the other person's information. And then lastly, I highly encourage everyone to follow Argon Medical, and Hatch Medical has their own social media connections as well, but follow us on social media, hear about new products coming to market, hear about new educational opportunities, CME courses, these ACES courses. highly encourage you to follow us on social media so that you can remain plugged in to what's happening in Argon, especially this year in our year of innovation, because you'll be hearing a lot about a lot of new technologies that we're bringing to market here over the next 6 to 7 months. So with that, Catherine, let's wrap up. I appreciate everyone's attention today. Thank you to all the panelists for your information. Appreciate everything that you offered in the pearls of wisdom. And I wish everyone, depending on where you are in the world, a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good night.